Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think this speaker series and this entire season of events and art calls and bringing all these folks together is so important. And I truly cannot say how honored I am to be part of it. The moment that I was asked to be part of it, it was clear to me that the whole point of my artistic practice is to be in conversation and forge collaboration where maybe those types of collaboration are not always precedented. So I do have two special guests that I'm delighted to introduce you to in a couple moments. For our time together, I'm going to give an overview of the process, how the project came to be, the production itself, and then rather than analyze how it went, I'm going to ask the people that I worked with, and that is Brad White, who is the fire chief of the Grand Fire Protection District 1, and also in the mitigation committee of the Grand County Wildfire Council, which is an amazing thought leader in the wildfire mitigation space and has incredible educational resources for residents, professionals, and also Nick Guarino, who is a former seasonal ranger at Rocky Mountain National Park. And I worked really closely with both Nick and Brad in the making of this piece because they both brought experiences that were absolutely central to the story that we're trying to tell. So rather than describe that, I'm going to ask them how it went, and then we will show a couple of clips from the piece and open the floor to Q&As. So I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about the inspiration for this project because we started working on this piece in August 2020. And at the time, the COVID-19 pandemic had already totally shuttered New York theaters across the country, and not just theater, but any type of in-person artistic theatrical collaboration. So I mention that because not only was fall 2020 and 2020's wildfire season in Colorado a massively impactful year, for me as a theater artist, it was already a time of isolation and uncertainty, and definitely when a lot of the bedrocks of what the day-to-day life of the theater artist were taken away. So my connection personally to wildfire is that I grew up in Black Forest, Colorado, which was impacted in the 2013 Black Forest fire. And at the time, I was a senior in college, and it was one of those events that absolutely exploded my understanding of what wildfire could do and what was possible. And I think the thing that struck me the most going through the experience was how much of the experience starts when the fire is contained. And I think that sometimes the way that we encounter wildfire in the news, it's very event heavy and it's very much focused on the most uncontrolled, panicky moments. But my personal experience has been one that, deals with grief and loss and processing change, and was emotionally impactful to the point that I don't really think I would have been ready to write about wildfire before 2021, which at that point was 8 years after that event. So I found myself in fall 2020, without a normal theater life. And for me, something about watching the East Troublesome Fire on the news, although I had never spent time in Grand Lake in Grand County, Colorado, was just, I had like an out-of-body experience. And because the news cycles were competing and things were coming up and they were going down, and it felt like there was no sustained focus and everyone was sucked into their own crises, for me, that's the need for a playwright. Like, let's get in a room and let's look at this and let's spend time with this and let's sit with this. And I'm very fortunate that I have a relationship with the Denver Center for the Performing Arts in Colorado. I had actually been developing a play with them just before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so they were really receptive to the idea. And together we started exploring what would a show that responds in real time to the East Troublesome Fire and is designed to be performed outdoors next summer look like? A small project. And I also was really fortunate to have a relationship with History Colorado, and particularly History Colorado's Museum of Memory. And if you've never heard of Museum of Memory, I encourage you to look it up because it is the most incredible initiative within History Colorado, which is a statewide historical organization. And their goal is to center the interests of the community in recording their own past, whatever that is. So I approached them and asked if they would be interested in being part of this project, and they were really enthusiastic. And so then we started asking questions that launched us into the work. And I'm most interested in theater processes where instead of me going into my room and closing the door and using my imagination and thinking, what would a play or a musical about the East Troublesome Fire be like, and making something up, and then maybe supporting that with some research on the back end if we're trying to figure out the costumes. My practice is to take that research, put it at the front end of the process, and ask questions like, if we are doing a play about the East Troublesome Fire, who needs to be included in that process? And how can we make this a process that is able to really receive and hold space and help people understand what happened here? I will also say that I was dealing with racking ethical concerns because anytime an artist is working and making theater inspired by real stories, the responsibility is massive. This work has a history of being very extractive. If one goes into a space, especially a space where something as devastating as a wildfire happens, and takes stories or, takes and then uses that for gain. So that was sort of in my head. And then also asking questions of, is it too soon? Like, is it literally too soon for a theater project to be of use or be a space for healing? And so those questions were very, very urgent and very forward for me. And it caused me to articulate fairly early in the process that this piece had two goals. One goal was for people who don't live in Grand County or were not familiar with the East Troublesome Fire to understand the scope of the event. In very basic terms, give them actual time, accurate information, and an emotional opportunity to empathize, which, especially when we're so inundated by data and the complexity of policy, feels like something that I as a playwright can offer. And then the second goal was for residents of Grand County, for the people who went through this, how can this play be a gift and something that says, I heard your stories, I hear you, I feel with you, and then it can hold up a mirror to the most resonant and amazing parts of those stories, because they truly were amazing. So we had our partnerships in place, we had a production in place. The only thing we didn't have was a play or a script. And I guess that's my job. So I started making outreach into the community. And I just want to say this about both Brad and Nick before they join me. The ask to someone like Brad or like Nick to work with me is spectacularly huge, right? Because I didn't have anything to show them in order to say that this is going to be good. My ask to them was, would you trust me with the worst week of your life, I would imagine, because I think I can stick the landing. So, the level of trust that goes into those conversations is absolutely the most precious part of my artistic practice, and something that, before my first phone calls with both of them, I was actively wiping my palms on my jeans because I get so nervous. It's a huge deal. And so I held oral history interviews with 30 people who were impacted in some way by the East Troublesome Fire. Some not quite as closely as both Brad and Nick, but it was a plethora of experiences. I spent 9 classes working with a high school and listening to high schoolers talk about their experiences. We did group oral histories, we did individual oral histories, and now all of those conversations are part of a new collection at History Colorado's Museum of Memory, which is very exciting. And so then we had a date, we had partners, we had a show, we had 30 oral history interviews, and we still didn't have a script. And from that point, the big writing changes and the big vision for the show was I distilled these oral histories into I still have my notes from the show on the board, 7 composite characters. They are unnamed, they are mixes of people. They're actually named in the script only by their role in the community. And the reason that I did that is because when I think about going through an experience like that, or any experience where you're sort of off yourself, in my head, I clock people by their roles more than by their names. And so that was a way to not only keep people anonymous, but keep the experience true to, the way that we interact with community in these situations. And then I created fictional aspects of each character so that all of the characters had an arc, which is a theater term for they change. They come into the show with one idea, these events happen, and then by the end of the show, something is different. And the idea there was that I was able to take different archetypes and infuse them with these really detailed, incredible stories, and hopefully come up with a piece where people felt like they had a window into real people, but they weren't actually real people, like we weren't exposing actual people in that way. And the biggest thing that I learned through the course of that process and through the course of the hours and hours of oral history, and then the other hours that I spent going through the oral histories and the writings, is that we absolutely cannot parachute solutions in from the outside, and that there is nobody who understands wildfire better than the people who've been through it or the people whose jobs are to deal with it. And since the entire point of my process is to amplify those stories and contain those stories and give them space and amplify them through my creative work, I brought the 2 people with me tonight who really helped shape the play. So the first of these is Nick Guarino, and I have structured just a couple questions so that we can reflect on the process. But Nick, do you want to start by introducing yourself and your role at Rocky Mountain National Park?
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, thank you, Jessica, for asking me to join you tonight. This is great. So I'm Nick Guarino, and I work as a seasonal park ranger for the National Park Service. So what that means is I work for the Park Service spring, summer, and fall. And that's pretty common. About half of the park rangers you'll see in national parks are seasonal. So in the year 2020, I was at Rocky Mountain. I was there from May until January of 2021. And the fire that Jessica's play is about took place in October of that year. So it was towards the latter portion of my employment there. Now, when you tell people you're a park ranger, people, they want to know if you ride a horse, if you rappel off of cliffs, if you carry a gun. I don't do any of those things. There are rangers that do those things. I'm what's called an interpretation ranger, which means my job is to interpret the resources. So I'm kind of like an outdoor educator. So if there's a ranger-led hike or a campground program or a remote session with classroom students all around the country, that's done by people like me. So my job is primarily, I'm a communicator. I'm supposed to be there to help visitors understand why the park is important, why it's special, why it should be preserved, all in pursuit of the Park Service's mission to preserve and protect national parks and treasured resources.
Absolutely. And I think something that was apparent to me way before I started writing is that Rocky Mountain National Park is absolutely beloved. Whether you're from Colorado, whether you're not from Colorado, it is just an absolutely sacred landscape. So it felt important to make sure that we were doing right and representing it. So I contacted Nick like a true psychopath via Instagram because I discovered his account, and it felt really important to be working with someone who understood the Park Service and understood Rocky Mountain National Park. So now I'm going to ask you, Nick, and obviously I've never asked you this in public before, but what was your experience of being interviewed, participating in this project, and then seeing the play?
Yeah, so the experience, I was thinking about this earlier. It was very in line with how I think and what I do. You approaching me asking if I wanted to share these thoughts and talk about these experiences. It's very much similar to my other motivations. So the same sort of thing that motivates me to want to be an interpreter and to do interpretation and share why these things are important. Very similar. It's very natural for me to want to do that. So when you asked, I didn't hesitate at all. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about it. So then a couple months later, of course, I went to Denver. It was the opening night of the show, and I saw the show with some of my friends, which was an interesting experience. These were friends who I had been speaking to during the actual fire as well. So they were locals to Denver. And when it was going on, I was texting with them, and they were saying, if you need a place to stay, if you need to come sleep on my couch, you're welcome to do that. So they had a little bit of knowledge of what was going on. And obviously I had knowledge. It was a new experience for me. The character in the show, it's not me, but it's similar. We have similar thoughts about things. My friends were kind of snickering during the show at certain lines, and they'd say, you definitely say that. So that was kind of a unique experience for me. But one of the things that struck me about the performance, and even then talking with my friends afterwards, one of my friends said, she said, do you think it's too soon? And the honest truth is that had not occurred to me until she said that. I really didn't even think about that. I found the experience extremely validating. Hearing the things that the characters in the play had to say, not only the character that was somewhat based on our conversation, but it was really, really validating to have the other characters corroborate what I had experienced as well. I didn't find myself completely different than what the others were saying as well. But also, there was this very cool community aspect. There were certain lines in the play, certain moments in the play that really spoke to the local communities as well as the experience and the reaction of the audience. It was obvious that those certain moments really resonated. And I felt like I was having a experience with the other audience members, that we were kind of sharing this experience together, this sort of nodding moment of yes, that's how I feel about what happened too, and feeling that other people felt that as well. It made it feel more real. It made it feel like you didn't have to explain yourself. Like everyone here gets it. So it was extremely comforting and validating in that way.
Oh, yeah, that's thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting. That kind of opens up the part of my theater brain that knows that that's sort of since ancient Greece, that's a little bit you're describing the psychological process of catharsis, right? Where you see something and you connect to it, and something within you is able to change.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one more question for you. You and I, and we've talked about this at length, are somewhat in the same business of figuring out. I mean, obviously, I work more with oral history and true stories, and you work with the National Park System, but we're both in the business of using stories and programming to try to build bridges to public audiences and try to reach people who might not have ever given something thought, and let them know that it connects to them. How do you think that storytelling can help us process specifically sheer volume of acreage that we're losing to wildfire? Because I know that's something we talked about with Rocky, that people just can't wrap their head around the numbers of acres and the loss of land. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, this is something I actually do think about a lot, and it's not only Rocky Mountain. It's just fire in general and fire ecology is becoming a topic of discussion at many national parks. It's impacting a lot of different places, and I have thought about how do you communicate this in a way that's productive? Because I'm speaking, you know, personally here. What I find is that when you start talking about the fires, you start to feel like you're going a little crazy. And the reason I say that is it's all very hyperbolic. You're using terms like biggest, fastest, largest, most. And the problem is the hyperbole is also factually correct. You're accurate when you're using those words. And I'm thinking, okay, for future programs where I want people to understand the importance of the fires and the importance of our impacts and how we influence those fires, how do you talk about these things in a way that it's just not entirely discouraging or that it just sounds like just too much to comprehend? The truth is, I don't have an answer to this question yet. It's something I'm working on, and it's something I know other park rangers and interpretation rangers are working on as well. One of the things I'm really curious to try is to personalize it. Basically, do what you did with the play. You know, if you're talking about just massive numbers, it is very overwhelming and it can also seem kind of distant. But if you're telling it through the story of people, real people, I think there's an easier way for people to connect to what you're saying. There's more to take away from it. There's more to feel connected to it and to care about it in a way that, you know, there's something that we can do. So that's
Absolutely.
sort of my forward looking idea as of right now on how to address this issue.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because obviously my audience for this piece with the Denver Center was largely either Coloradans who are already aware of and invested in wildfire outcomes or actual residents of Grand County. And I think your audience at a national park is obviously much wider and brings varying levels of awareness.
Definitely.
Yeah, well, I look
Yeah.
forward to our large scale future national park collaborations. Thank you
Definitely.
so much for
You're
joining
welcome.
me for this. And I will say, the character that Nick inspired, who is very non-creatively named park ranger, was absolutely a crowd pleaser. So, you know, people were, it wasn't just your friends who were snickering.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure. You're welcome.
And lastly, I was going to invite Brad White to join for a couple questions. And I will say that the call I made to Brad was the first research call I made on this project. And I will probably remember it for the rest of my life because I thought I was having trouble choking the words out because I was so nervous to talk to Brad because I'm so appreciative and in awe of the work and everything that he and his teams did during the fire itself. So sort of a starstruck moment for me, and I'm super appreciative that he's here. And the thing that I will say about interviewing Brad before I ask him a question is that if you are looking to interview someone for a play, interview a fire chief because it will be the most organized interview of your life. Brad brought timestamps, he brought documents, and then he literally handed me the spine of the play because I used his timestamps and wedged in other people's stories and testimonies around what he gave me. And so I think, especially for the fire itself, that was a huge gift. The thing I wanted to ask you first, Brad, is that what you shared with me about Mama ended up being the heart of the show. Can you share a little bit about Mama and how that impacted, you know, the story of the fire?
Yeah. So Mama is an acronym we've got for we've got a regional group called the Mountain Area Mutual Aid Group, And fire's been a growing problem. We're pretty high up in the Colorado Rockies here, and we traditionally have not had a lot of large fire. We'll get some lightning strikes, we'll get the occasional escape pile burn, but a lot of our neighboring resort communities were seeing the same things we were seeing, which is just this buildup over time of bigger, more consequential fires going on. And as you look to plug into kind of the federal wildland firefighting system, it's got some limitations. And one is, their whole system is kind of set up to spread resources around the country, but particularly the West, in kind of small numbers. And so when you get something that lights off and the local guys can't handle it, after the first day or two, they start bringing in resources. In a lot of cases, that's way up on the forest, or it's up in the national park, or it's you got a lot of time. In a lot of cases, those fires are good for the environment, and they've got some time, and it takes, in a lot of cases, a few days to get all the right resources there, especially if it goes big and we need, what we call a type 1, type 2 incident management team. But for us fire chiefs, our job is protecting homes and the community. And we don't always have that luxury of time. And a lot of times things, whether they start in the forest or whether they start in the subdivision, they start growing kind of quickly, and they're growing right next to homes and things. So, we kind of started the Mama group, the Mountaineering Mutual Aid group, a couple of years prior. Just in conversation, we all felt like we had this problem that we had to get more resources to a fire sooner than what the federal system traditionally has provided. And so, working together, this wasn't our first season, but it wasn't very old, 3 or 4 seasons. And we've had some good wins over the year, those couple of years. And so, that's kind of the basis of it. Just getting more help faster.
And we ended up making that a big part of the story, is how other counties came in to help. And I don't know if you've seen Lord of the Rings, when they light the fires of Gondor.
Yeah.
But we had when we were working on the show, we called it the Fires of Gondor moment, where, everyone starts coming and and the beacon goes.
It's pretty similar.
That's how it felt when you described it to me. I think there's a precedent of an oral history interviewer being a little bit, zipped up and distanced, and whether or not that's the right thing to do. I specifically remember you telling me how it felt when everybody came, and I was like, oh my God.
It's nice when you get a big problem that you got friends that are going to share it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's so much confusion about what happens when people evacuate. I think people just don't understand how wildfires are actually fought. So my question for you is, you got so many press inquiries and coverage during this fire. What is different about the play, and what was the experience like for you?
Well, I think as first responders, a large part of our job, regardless of what we show up to, whether it's a motor vehicle accident or a structure fire or wildland fire, a large part of our job is to take on somebody else's problem that they've got a lot of emotion invested into, and pull that emotion out of it, and put some logic and some strategy and tactics, and use the tools at our disposal, which could be properly trained people, it could be equipment or whatever, and again, pull that emotion out and just work the problem. And we get a lot of requests for interviews after small incidents, or certainly after this one we had a lot of requests, and they're usually after stats and numbers: how many acres, how many homes were threatened, how many people need to evacuate or did evacuate, and things like that. And so this scene that we just worked in a very strategy and tactic way lends well to that interview that a reporter's kind of asking these questions, and you're just trying to get factual stuff out there. And so this whole thing was a little different. We did a lot of interviews after that fire, and some of them, we felt like we needed to share, our experience from a community preparedness side, some of it from a fire behavior side, some of it from a, lessons learned side. And I guess what you asked us to do, Jessica, was wrap everything up and also throw some of that emotion back in there that we worked so hard to pull out. So a little different.
Oh my gosh, Brad and I had a joke when I was interviewing him that all of the things he was describing to me, I was making lists of why I'm not fit to be a first responder, just personality wise, skills wise. And I think everything you're saying about being rational in a high emotional time, I think it's very different than what I do on a day-to-day basis. So my other question for you is, you and the Grand County Wildfire Council are thought leaders, and you were before the East Troublesome Fire. What are the ways that it's difficult to share the knowledge that you have painstakingly gathered with the community, and what are the ways that you think that these kinds of collaborations can help there? Whether with the playwright, or I know you do a lot of work with universities. Like, what is the role of collaboration?
Well, I think collaboration is how we get things done. For a small rural fire department, we're still mostly volunteer. We've got roughly 30 firefighters, and I've got 5 paid staff. And so whenever we can collaborate with somebody else on a project, whether it's a response, whether it's talking in an HOA meeting, homeowners association meeting, something like that, we're just that much more productive. And my sheriff friend uses the word a force multiplier, and so you get a few people involved and you start cranking the ideas around and putting them out there in the public, and you're just adding tools to a toolbox when you can collaborate on things.
Absolutely. Were there any facets of this play that revealed parts of the Troublesome Fire in a way that was different or new for audiences?
Well, kind of a tricky question. I'm not sure how audiences. I don't know too many more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know too many more examples like this where the audience has an opportunity to take something away other than what a reporter's telling them, mm-hmm. right? Or what an author has written up and put in a magazine for them to read later. It's well, you're gonna have to. I got sidetracked. Refresh me on the question there.
Were there facets of listening to these stories? Because obviously, firefighting was a huge part of the play that let audiences into a new side of what it was like behind.
Well, I can tell you a little bit. My experience as a responder versus an audience member and what I saw. This was a big event. Nick mentioned it. 200,000 acre fire that essentially affected 3 towns in our county and another town in another county. And as firefighters, we're kind of involved right at the get-go, and in a lot of ways, I think I think all our firefighters, mental health wise, in a lot of ways, were probably better than the community, because they just went to work for 3 days straight until they were just plumb tired, and they when they tapped out, they knew they put in everything they could and did what they could, and now they got to go, right? And so after this fire, for the next few months, we go straight from fire, and then we get into winter blizzard, and then we're doing all these meetings on recovery and what are we going to do about all these homes that are burnt down, and how are we going to make these areas safe again. We got trees that are going to fall on trailheads. We've got the winter economy of snowmobiling and all that. How are we going to keep the public safe on that? And then we kind of get into spring, and we're worried about the floods and all these things. And it's kind of go, 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 go. And even though I had a lot of conversations with people in the community, and I've talked with some of those homeowners that I knew forever that lost their home, or that we'd been to their house and worked on fire mitigation stuff, and they did it, and either the house didn't make it or it did make it, and they got kind of some survivor's guilt, to sit in the audience and see all that parallel instead of kind of these siloed experiences was pretty powerful. And I think, you know, a lot of those folks in the audience that we were with were just, you know, took away a whole different story point, you know, just got the whole thing there. And, you know, I know that as you and I were talking, as you were trying to pull this together, in fact, it was probably a couple of days before your show, my wife was asking, or, you know, we were planning on going. She's like, well, how's she going to fit all this into a stage? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. You know, but you're able to do it. And I think it presented a very, you know, complete, very emotional story to the whole community, and captured what Nick was going through, captured what my folks were going through, captured what, you know, the pastor at the church was going through. And a lot of those experiences that we might have seen little snippets of over those months, you know, those first few days, those first few weeks, and those next months. But, you know, again, you put them all kind of parallel together, and it's a big, powerful experience, I think.
Well, I want to add to that I think one of the most incredible moments that you get to have as a playwright is when something that you believe and have spent a lot of time with is seen and felt by an audience. And I know that when I was writing, especially after the conversations that you and I had, my awe and reverence for what you and your teams did for those 5 days after the fire exploded could not be put into words. And of course, that's my job, so I tried. And I will say that at all three of the performances, the audience had applause for the firefighters that stopped the show. We were literally holding the show because people were applauding. And for me, the moment of recognizing, oh, everyone feels the way about your work that I do was really moving. So, you know, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We're you know, again, a volunteer group, and one of the challenges we kind of had was, you know, everybody wants, you know, a lot of people want to grow up and be a firefighter, right? And as a local community, a lot of times you actually just get pulled or sucked into it. You know, it's less of a career choice and just somebody needs to do it. And so we've got a lot of folks who, you know, go through an experience like that and they don't feel like they did anything heroic. In fact, we lost all these homes, and you know, the one thing we're supposed to do, we didn't do very well. And you know, it's kind of this big experience, and for the weeks and months afterwards, everybody's thanking the firefighters. And you know, our folks just didn't feel like they deserved it. I finally had to pull some folks aside and say, look, this is part of how the community heals. You got to let them thank you, and you got to appreciate it, because you know, again, we feel in a lot of ways our part was done those first few days, and now we just got to live with the consequences. But you know, we actually, for, you know, a year and a half later, we're still getting cards and thank yous and all that. And so I actually think by being an audience in the play and seeing some of what, you know, all these other characters were going through at the same time, it kind of ties all that back together, and you get it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for what you do. We are going to show a quick clip from the show or two, and then open it up to questions with both Brad and Nick. So now I'm going to begin the terrifying process of sharing my screen. One moment. All right, and this is the opening moments of the play. We rehearsed in Denver for 6 weeks at the Denver Center, and then we did 3 outdoor performances. We did one at Levitt Pavilion in Denver. We did one at the Lake Dillon Amphitheater in Silverthorne, Dillon, Colorado, and then we did one in Winter Park, which was as close to Grand County as we could get while being outside at a concert venue. So this is a clip from the Denver show.
These hearts, these dreams, these webs we weave. These hearts, these dreams, these webs we weave. These hearts, these dreams, these webs we weave.
On October 14th, 2020, the East Troublesome Fire began in northern Colorado. It burned for 1 week before exploding on October 21st, making a 100,000-acre run overnight, the most rapid wildfire expansion in state history. The entire towns of Grand Lake and Estes Park were evacuated, displacing 35,000 people. The fire destroyed 366 homes, took 2 lives, and forever changed the landscape of Rocky Mountain National Park.
We say that to get it out of the way, because that's not the story we're telling. That is the story of the fire. And this is the story of the people who came together in response. Well, the angels dance here in between the air and that silver moon. Them devils only come to dream of this. Yeah, y'all. Well, the saints come in with mirth and joy. They sure come in, dance up a storm. They're turning tables, reciting poems. They speak what comes of hearts and tongues. Hearts and tongues. Hearts and tongues.
Our story crosses these...
That gives a taste of how the show starts, and then I'm going to show one other snippet. Sorry, I'm looking at my timestamp. I will say, every time I watch the recording, because I'm such a live theater artist, I get so nervous, and I'm always worried that it's going to be okay, but that is a difference about video. All right, here. So this next section is from sort of the most stressful climax of the show, when the characters are in the process of evacuating during the fire, and the firefighters are in the process of mobilizing against the explosion itself.
Come and find me, and this wild blue ocean spread out between us. It may be that our ship sinks before the sun has seen us.
Breaking on Denver News 9, the East Troublesome Fire has exploded in size, prompting emergency evacuations of the entire town of Grand Lake.
I am lost at sea. I am lost at sea.
After we got the town cleared out, I ran back to the fire station. By this point, we understood this was going to be a multiple-day thing. And best case scenario, we're 110 firefighters. That wasn't going to be close to enough. But a few years back, we started this mountain area mutual aid group, which we call MAMA. It's about a 10-county area, and any agency that's got land or homes that are threatened can push out a massive call directly to every fire division in the group. This is local firefighters committing to each other. If you're having a bad day, call us. We'll come help as quick as we can.
Lose your way, and you'll find what you see. I have found love when I was lost at sea.
So we put out the distress call, and right away, we started hearing back.
Summit County,
Eagle County, Garfield County,
Adams County,
And East Grand, Hot Sulphur Springs, Timberline, Glenwood Springs, they all put people on trucks and sent them our way.
So that is the excerpt that deals with the Mama section that Brad, and if you think that line is beautiful that explains Mama, that came out of Brad's mouth. So, you know, this was a really important part of the story, and I was so appreciative to work with Brad. And, you know, in conclusion, I think that we are just at the beginning of telling stories about wildfire. I think that theater can offer so much because the exercise of watching someone tell you the story can create a new space. I think it can create a way to sort of turn down the numbers part of the brain, turn down the adrenaline part of these experiences, and actually sit with these experiences and think about solutions. And I have so much respect for Grand County as a community, and especially for Brad and Nick, who I would not have been able clearly to make this piece without. So thank you so much, everyone. And we're looking forward to the Q&A.
And thank you so much. Thanks especially for sharing clips, and Nick and Brad for being with us tonight. I'd like to invite everybody who's out there to put some questions in the Q&A, and we also have some questions from when people registered. And so I'd like to start by asking you a question that is from someone in our audience. How could people do this in their own fire-ravaged communities? They couldn't do exactly what you've done. They would need you. But how, maybe to rephrase that a little bit, how could people use story and integrate story as they're going through this in their communities?
So in the past, when I have done research-driven work, and this was something that I sort of adjusted for this process, I've done oral history processes, and then the play itself needs so much trimming, right? Like if you think about trying to trim a hedge down, your first draft, I mean, my first draft of this piece was 5 times longer than it needed to be because it was just huge. And so I think the first step, and this is what I would recommend to that person, is take time to gather those stories and to listen and receive them and preserve them and care for them, and don't worry about what the product is going to be, because I think the most valuable thing and one of the biggest services you can give to the people with whom you're doing oral history is just that presence and listening. So I would start by just collecting stories, whether that's on Zoom with the the recorded function or your iPhone. Just make space for people to share with you, and then go from there.
Thanks so much. And Nick and Brad, if you want to jump in on any of these, please feel free to do that. I also want to fully acknowledge that everybody's in a later time zone and has had long days, and so it's okay if we're a little slow to answering some of these. Is there anything that either one of you would like to add to that? And then I have some other questions here as well.
What I would add is start small and start with some of the near misses. Before the community has this huge disaster, what can we learn and turn into story and make an emotional impact in the community on the preparedness side? That would be my takeaway, I guess.
I just second the comments of my colleagues.
Great. Thank you. So to kind of build on that, Brad, what you just said, so there's the preparedness piece and kind of being ready before this happens. And then if it does happen and, there's the aftermath, what did this process and then seeing the play, what did you learn about how best to support communities and how to be in community as for communities that are faced with wildfire? And I will say, Jess, you said, if that line was inspiring about Mama in the show, it was to me. So thanks, Brad, that it is an inspiration.
I did it again. I told you guys before we got on, I've been out since 3 this morning on accidents and stuff. So I'm getting a little, hit your question one more time.
Just, how best can we support communities and be in communities?
Well, I think what Jessica captured was it's not up to any one of us. It's going to take all of us. And, we've got local nonprofits that, at the time my folks were tapped out and emotionally drained and exhausted. There's this whole other thing happening, and it's, evacuation centers and disaster information centers and things like that. And there's a whole group of nonprofits and just people who care that are picking up the next piece of the puzzle there. And it's just that, the whole community stepping in when they can and taking the torch while they can for a little bit. And then at some point they got to step back out, but then, to have somebody else that's ready to jump in there and help. I think that's what's gotten us through. And we're, we still got a little bit of a road to haul here, but I think, we've got past through the first year, and I think we've relied heavily on each other, and that's what it takes.
I think what I would add is that before doing this project, I didn't understand, to what Brad is saying, that when you're trying to support a community going through this, it's important to focus on the community and those mutual aid organizations and those on the ground nonprofits. I think people have the impulse to go big and go national and donate to the Red Cross. And I think something that I learned from being part of this process is that, the closer you can get your support to on the ground in a time of need is the most responsible thing to do.
Thanks for that.
I also had a little bit of a weird experience because I'm not part of the Grand County community. And when I was in these conversations, because especially Grand Lake is so beloved in the summer and tourists come from around the country, something I heard was that some of the visitors were callous in their processing of the fire in real time, that was really grating for the people who've gone through the fire. And then getting so deep into the project, I was in Grand Lake on a research visit in the middle of rehearsal, and I heard somebody get out of their car who's clearly from out of town and, look up at the burn scar above town and say, oh, well, it didn't even come into town. And I almost lost my mind. And so I think stepping into that, a little bit of a hybrid, within and without the community role, just made me feel even more protective of, supporting the communities themselves as individual communities and not as a monolith of fire impacted communities.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Nick, I'll create a space for you here with no pressure to speak every time.
Yeah, I'll just add it's interesting that the proof of what both Jessica and Brad are saying, there was an organization in the county called Outbreak of Kindness, which actually was created previously to assist people with what was going on with the pandemic. And then that organization basically pivoted and they went into fire recovery mode. And from what I understand, it worked pretty well because they already had these systems going. They already had a communication network. They were already doing weekly emails. And then those emails became, who can deliver this to this house? Does anyone have this to donate right now? And that was as local as it gets. It was a county organization and they knew the community best. So I think they were able to function really well.
Oh, what a wonderful thing to have some organization come out of the pandemic that can then carry on. I think a lot of us will be looking up Outbreak of Kindness. So thanks for sharing that. We don't have a lot of time left, and there are a couple questions about if it's possible to see this. Seeing it in person would be a whole thing. Are there plans for that to happen?
We're working on a couple things, and I will make sure that whatever we have, you will be the first to know, and that we can let the folks know who are at this talk tonight.
Great. You said, I'm sorry, I don't know if I was the only one that had trouble with your audio there, but
I said we're working on a couple things, and I will make sure that you have all the information so that folks from this talk can have it as well.
Great. So we'll share that out when we can. And then maybe just to end tonight with a question for you, Jess. You had this vision and brought together musicians, the community, this storytelling, this memory, museum of memory. You brought together so many different pieces. What are you envisioning next? What has captured your imagination or curiosity for future projects?
That's a great question. You mean specifically in the Wildfire space?
With Wildfire, or with anything else that we can, kind of keep watching.
Yeah, absolutely. I recently, obviously, we've all been following the Marshall Fire in Colorado since late December, and I have been reading about, just this week I was reading about the sacrifices specifically that school bus drivers are making to make sure that their students who are now displaced or living quite a bit further from their school district are able to get to school. And I bookmarked that. So I cannot share any details at this time because, it's all cooking up here. But I think that what this process revealed to me is that there's a lot of storytelling to do around Wildfire that isn't Wildfire itself, right? That isn't the fire itself. And I think there's a lot more to dig into.
Yeah. Well, for sharing what you could, and we will look forward to that and share that with our community. Brad, good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
you for being up so late with us.
So many hours.
It's all good. Thanks for
having us. Nick, and Nick, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story. And it was really fun to see those little clips that we did. And we're grateful to all of you for being here this evening, and to everybody who's watching tonight. I hope that you can join us next week. We'll have a poetry reading with Molly Fisk and with 5 other poets who they'll be reading their work in the collection, but they're also going to be reading work that is written by students who have pieces in the poetry anthology as well. And so we'll be exploring more stories next week. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and take really good care of yourselves and of each other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.